I'd like to share with you that over this journeying that has taken place, many people have asked me, what do you do? What is your purpose? What is your intent? What kind of meditation is it you teach? And the replies have been varying according to the person who is asking the question, but generally it could be stated that it's just storytelling. Nothing but storytelling. But when we look at storytelling and stories, we can see that those stories have their own way. So you could call it the way of stories. But from my experience, and perhaps from yours too, you've discovered that whilst the stories can be edifying, they can be amusing, they can be entertaining, they can make us think, in the end, what they really do is dismantle whatever it is that's there in us at a particular time. And if we look at some of us who've been together for years and the phases that the stories have gone through, we'll recognize that indeed what has happened has been the dismantling of whatever it was that was there for us at a time. The phase when we went through a state of being a seeker, the phase when we went through the state of being a healer, the state where we were a teacher or an enlightened being. We've all been through these phases. But when we've come together, you'll perhaps recognize that the stories have done nothing more than dismantle our conditioned thinking about what a teacher, a seeker, a master, a healer is, so that we've been able to experience for ourselves without a conditioned thinking about what a seeker, a teacher, a master, a healer is, to be able to act it in our life. Consider perhaps what it has happened for you over these years and what stories do for us. But for me, I recognize that this is the underlying way of stories. So whatever you come with is going to be dismantled, unraveled, so that there's the possibility that you can experience the master, the teacher, that you are. Now, over these last days, it has been said, as has been said many times, we have to be divine scientists, divine physicists, and divine alchemists. But now, there's another one added to it. We have to be divine mystics. But, or divine and mystic are synonymous. We can say a divine and a mystic. So really, it doesn't make sense. But following on with calling ourselves divine scientists and divine physicists, we just use that as a phrase. Because in the process, what we think a mystic is going to be dismantled by the stories, so that we have the possibility of claiming our mystic, because we are all mystics. But when we take our mind and we hear the word mystic, it becomes elevated. Oh, I could never be a mystic, because a mystic to my mind is this, 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 and this. Not so. Not so. So let's see what these stories do for us, what these parables, what these fairy tales, what these folk tales do. Remembering that the way of stories is to dismantle any conditioning that we might have relative to what it is we think we are, so that we can experience what we are. And we're all of those things. Seeker, teacher, the master, the scientist, the physicist, the alchemist, and the mystic. What lies beyond that? You have to keep coming. Otherwise you'll be out of a job. Story. The story, there are many similar stories, but this one has a different theme and is rather long. It's about a very, very, very rich merchant. He was inordinately rich. He was so rich and he had such influence that people used to bow to him like he was some kind of god. But this merchant had 3 daughters. One day he called his eldest daughter to him and he said, "Daughter, where do you think I got my wealth and my esteem?" And the daughter said, "Oh, dear father, it's from your own efforts." Oh, the merchant was very, very pleased with this answer. So he called his second daughter to him, and his second daughter gave a similar answer to this, and it pleased him very greatly. He said, "Oh, the education that I've given you has been well worthwhile." And he gave her gifts as he did with the first daughter. Then he called his third daughter to him and asked the same question of her. She said, "Oh, father, everything. There is nothing that comes into being without Allah." "Allah," he said, "all of my education has been to no avail. Out." He said, "All right, if you believe that Allah does all things, we'll go out and prove it for yourself." So, the third and most beautiful of the daughters was sent out without anything. She packed only a few pieces of clothing and put it in a rag bag and carried it out, away from the opulence, palatial residence of her father. And she wandered very aimlessly for a while, but of course night came and there were wild animals around in the area, so she had to find a place to find somewhere to rest and safety for the night. And she came across what was a very crude shed-like building, and she found that it was inhabited by muleteers, men who gathered their mules together and put them in the shed for safety, and they themselves living in that shed. But they welcomed her and gave her what they had. And in the morning, one of the muleteers said to her, "I don't have the price of a bride, but I need a bride. I need a wife." And she said, "You don't have a price, and I don't have a place to live. The saucepan has found its lid. Let's get married." And so they did. And after due time, the wife, now the muleteer's wife, gave birth to a baby girl. But the midwives, on taking sight of this child, knew that she was special, a gift of the gods. And this was proven because when they took the child to bathe her, the droplets that fell off her body turned into gold. And when she made a sound, jasmine smell and lilies came out of her mouth. Well, of course, before long, where the muleteer's shed was a building like a palace which rivaled the palatial residence of the merchant. And of course, as things go, it came to the ears of the merchant and his 2 daughters of how the 3rd daughter was living, and so the sisters went along to see. And, of course, when they saw how their youngest sister was living, their hearts were filled with envy. But this beautiful child, who spoke jasmine and lilies, and when she bathed, gold appeared, grew to an age where she had to be married. Well, of course, it was known that only a prince would be worthy of such beauty. And so it was. A prince came from a far distant land and claimed her for himself. But he had to leave and go back to his own kingdom to prepare for his bride, leaving behind the accoutrements that would allow her to be brought in pomp and splendor to his own kingdom. Well, of course, the sisters of the wife of the muleteer were jealous. And so one of them went to the muleteer's wife and said, "You cannot send your beautiful daughter alone to be married to her prince. And who else would be worthy to accompany her than I and my own daughter?" So this was agreed upon. And the elder sister, her daughter, and the beautiful being, bride-to-be, left on their journey to go to the kingdom. But on the way, the elder sister refused to give water to the young bride-to-be. So each day she got thirstier and thirstier. And when she begged for water, the elder sister said, "If you die, my daughter will take your place." But then the bride-to-be begged and begged just for a drop of water. And so the elder sister said, "I will give you water if you will give me your right eye." Thirst. We know thirst. Her thirst was so great, she was willing to give up her right eye for a drop of water. And so she did. But a few days later, the thirst was as great again. And the elder sister said, "I will give you water for your left eye." Her thirst was so great, she relinquished her left eye. She was now blind. In her blindness, the elder sister cast her out of the carriage and said, "No prince will marry you, a blind being. Now my daughter can take your place." So the bride-to-be was left to wander, stumbling in the dark, thirsty and hungry, until tiredness overtook her and she lay down to sleep. As she did, an old man with a long white beard came along and saw her lying there and took great pity on her and carried her back to his village in the forest. But when he arrived there, everyone said, "Why you bring this blind being to us? We already have trouble feeding the mouths we have." But then she spoke up and said, please, please, would you give me water in which to bathe? As she spoke, jasmine and lilies flowed out of her mouth, and they immediately knew this was someone special. So they brought water, and when she bathed, the droplets turned into gold. Of course, there was great rejoicing. In the meantime, the eldest sister and her daughter went to the palace of the prince, and when they presented themselves, and the prince confronted the daughter, he knew that she wasn't the same. And when she spoke, no, jasmine and lilies flowed, and he asked her why. And she said, oh, flowers have their season. But he knew. And he asked her, where is the ring that I gave you? And she said, oh, I lost it. So the prince knew that this was not his bride-to-be, but what could he do? He couldn't bring shame on his family, so he kept quiet about it. But of course, there were no jasmine, there was no lilies flowing. So people began to doubt. But in the meantime, the bride-to-be in the forest one day said to the old man, take this basket of jasmine and lilies to the palace of the prince, the streets of the city in which he lives, and call and say, no money required for these flowers, but an eye who heard the call of the old man, the aunt. She knew that it had to be proved to the prince that her daughter was giving forth jasmine and lilies. So she took out the right eye of her daughter and gave it to the old man. So when the prince came back from hunting his bride-to-be, falsely turned her head away. But she said, here, look at all of the jasmine and lilies that have flowed out of my mouth today. The old man took the eye back to the forest, and importuning Allah, the rightful bride-to-be, knelt down and placed the eye, and miraculously the eye was her own. The next day the old man went again with a basket of lilies and jasmine, making the same cry. No money needed, just an eye. And of course, the same situation remained. So the aunt took out the other eye of her daughter, gave it to the old man. But when the prince came back, he found his bride to be swathed, saying, I have the most dreadful headache. But look, here are the flowers that came out of my mouth today. The old man took the other eye back to the rightful bride, and again importuning Allah and placing the eye, it became her own. It seemed that she was as whole as she was before, But that very day, she took leave of those who had cared for her, and exchanging the bridal clothes that she had worn when she arrived for the garment of a boy, she left. And when she came to the gates of the palace, she accosted the gardener, and she said, "I have nowhere to go, but if you will employ me, I can lead the mule that grinds the millstone." So she was given a task. And every day she guided the mule. But then in the afternoon, when everyone was having their afternoon sleep, she would go to the palace garden pond and take off her clothing and bathe. Now the mule, seeing her beauty, would turn around and around faster and faster so that he could get glimpses of her. And so it began to be known, the little word getting around. You know, this little muleteer who guides the mule is just like a little piece of bamboo, but she grinds the mill faster than anyone has ever done. So the prince, it came to his ears, and he decided he'd go and check it out. So he came down and he saw the little being taking off her garments and her rings and bathe. And so he went to where her garments lay. And there, amongst the rings, was the ring he had given her. So he took it. And when the bride-to-be came out from bathing and put her clothing back on and placed the rings on her finger, one was missing. She looked and couldn't find the ring. And she cried. And then the prince came forward and said, "Who are you? I want to hear your story from beginning to end." And so she did. And of course, he realized this was his rightful bride. The end of the story we all know. The aunt and the daughter were cast out, and a great celebration took place as he took his rightful bride. Allegories, fairy tales, parables, metaphors, all kinds of stories. But looking now at this story, perhaps recognizing that in saying we have to be divine mystics, and having in our mind the thought of what a mystic is, something elevated, something out there. How is it that this story can dismantle, chip perhaps a little piece of what it is that we think a mystic is, so that we may have the possibility to experience ourselves mystic. We are. Thank you.